A U.S. soldier had just finished inspecting the entire underground tunnel system. Feeling the overwhelming relief of completing his task, he slowly began to crawl upward. His eyes focused solely on reaching the surface. He had no suspicion at all that danger silently awaited him above. Unbeknownst to him, a Vietnamese female soldier had been hiding quietly near the tunnel entrance. Her position was perfectly concealed. She had been patiently waiting in ambush for a long time. Her hand tightly gripped a carefully sharpened bamboo stick. Her eyes remained fixed on the entrance. Her breathing was steady, yet tense. She was prepared for the exact moment the enemy would emerge from below. The instant the American soldier's head broke through the earth, the sharpened stick plunged downward with terrifying speed. It pierced through his neck with a ruthless precision. Blood erupted violently from the fresh wound. He instinctively recoiled. The scene was brutal beyond imagination. The harsh reality of war hit him like a physical blow. Even the Vietnamese woman who had delivered the deadly strike could not withstand the gruesome sight. She quickly turned away, unable to look directly at the body of the man she had just killed. For a brief moment, remorse flashed across her face, but there was no time to dwell on her feelings. A sudden noise from below instantly drew her attention back. Realizing there was still an enemy soldier alive inside the tunnel, she quickly pulled the pin from a grenade. Without hesitation, she hurled it into the darkness. The explosion erupted violently. Dirt and debris flew into the air. The black soldier below was immediately stunned and disoriented by the powerful blast. The female guerrilla did not linger to witness the aftermath. Swiftly and silently, she abandoned her hiding spot. Her feet barely made a sound as she ran toward another secret exit. In seconds, she vanished completely into the darkness, leaving no trace behind. Beneath the surface, the tunnels stretched endlessly. They were more than just hiding places for the North Vietnamese army. They were lethal labyrinths designed specifically to trap and kill the invading American soldiers. Hidden everywhere inside were deadly traps ready to claim lives at the slightest mistake. One misstep by an American soldier was enough to trigger a horrifying death. Bamboo spikes, carefully sharpened and concealed, would puncture their flesh instantly. Those who witnessed the cruel fate of their comrades often lost their nerve completely. They broke down emotionally. Some wept openly, begging their commanders to retreat. But retreat was impossible. As soon as they turned their backs, North Vietnamese fighters, waiting in ambush, mercilessly opened fire. The helpless soldiers fell immediately. Their bodies collapsed to the ground, riddled with bullets. Driven by panic, another American soldier became lost within the confusing twists and turns of the tunnel network. In desperation, he mistook a blocked wooden barrier as an exit. He furiously pried it open with his knife, expecting freedom. Instead, he unleashed a powerful surge of floodwater. Water rushed forward like a deadly torrent. Before he realized what had happened, the soldier was swept away by the unstoppable current. He struggled fiercely yet helplessly. The freezing, muddy water filled his lungs. In a final, horrifying moment, he suffocated alone, deep within the darkness of the tunnel. The year was 1965. The Vietnam War had entered one of its most ferocious phases. The North Vietnamese army, struggling with severe shortages of supplies and outdated weapons, was forced into desperate guerrilla warfare. Thousands of secret tunnels were dug beneath the dense jungle, creating an invisible network of pathways that crisscrossed beneath the surface. These tunnels formed a hidden underground world that defied imagination. They were carefully planned and meticulously constructed. There were wells for fresh water, storage rooms full of food, and makeshift hospitals to treat wounded soldiers. Kitchens provided meals, sleeping quarters offered rest, and meeting rooms hosted strategic discussions. Yet this intricate world was far from safe for intruders. The tunnels themselves were tight and claustrophobic, measuring barely 80 centimeters wide, perfectly suited to the smaller and agile Vietnamese soldiers. They posed an impossible challenge for the larger American troops. Soldiers who dared enter often became trapped and helpless, easy prey for the merciless traps hidden in every corner. Realizing the danger, the U.S. military created a special combat unit, recruiting soldiers of smaller stature, specifically trained to navigate the narrow confines of these tunnels. On the very first day at their base, the new recruits were taught a harsh, unforgettable lesson. A captured North Vietnamese sniper was brought before the unit. Without hesitation or mercy, the commanding officer ordered the prisoner's immediate execution. The sniper was strung up from a tall tree. As the rope tightened around his neck, the prisoner thrashed violently. His struggles grew weaker, until finally, his body hung limp and lifeless. The horrifying spectacle shocked the recruits. Many turned their faces away, sickened and traumatized by the cruelty unfolding before them. One soldier openly protested, unable to contain his moral outrage. But the commander remained unmoved. With icy indifference, he reminded them the prisoner had killed 5 of their fellow Americans. In his eyes, no mercy deserved. Hidden deep within the dense foliage, a North Vietnamese guerrilla fighter silently observed the execution. Hatred burned fiercely in his eyes. This brutal scene etched itself into his memory, fueling a burning desire for vengeance. From that moment onward, he vowed to exact revenge, no matter the cost. Despite the apparent victory, the sergeant felt deeply uneasy. Something told him danger was still lurking beneath them. His instincts soon proved correct. Moments later, unsettling noises echoed up from below the tunnel entrance. The sergeant instantly ordered one of the young recruits, Kevin, to investigate. Kevin carefully descended into the darkness. His heartbeat quickened as he moved cautiously through the narrow passage. He froze in horror when he discovered his comrade, Jack, lying motionless on the tunnel floor. Blood pooled thickly around Jack's lifeless body. With all the strength he could muster, Kevin dragged Jack's corpse back toward the entrance. Desperation gripped him tightly. Yet despite Kevin's frantic efforts, Jack's lifeless eyes stared back at him, filled only with the final rage and despair of a man who never even glimpsed the face of his killer. Jack's sudden and brutal death plunged the entire unit into chaos. Panic threatened to overtake them all. Quickly regaining control, the sergeant commanded Kevin to hurl 2 grenades deep into the tunnel. Seconds later, the earth shook violently from the blasts. Silence followed, heavy and oppressive. The sergeant, determined to ensure their safety, ordered 1 more grenade, this time filled with tear gas, to be thrown below. They waited anxiously. The air grew tense, yet no movement came from within. Finally, with no sign of enemy activity, Kevin and a soldier named Big Black donned their gas masks and crawled down once again to confirm the enemy was dead. They found the bodies of 2 Vietnamese guerrillas, motionless and bloody. Deciding to eliminate the threat permanently, the pair placed explosive charges further down the tunnel. Kevin's movements were precise and careful. Along the way, he discovered a mine hidden beneath dirt. Calmly and deliberately, he disarmed it with his combat knife, continuing deeper into the darkness. Unbeknownst to Kevin and Big Black, just beneath them lay a secret underground meeting room. Inside, Vietnamese guerrillas were finalizing their plans for a devastating assault on the American camp above. After planting the explosives, Kevin suddenly noticed an emergency exit hatch directly overhead. Hope surged through him. He quickly reached upward, grasping at the latch. But before he could climb out, a familiar and deadly presence appeared once again. The same Vietnamese female guerrilla who had earlier killed Kevin's comrade waited silently above. Her face was tense with determination. The moment Kevin's head appeared, she drove another sharpened bamboo stick straight down into his neck. Blood gushed fiercely, spraying onto Big Black below. The horrific sight caused even the battle-hardened guerrilla woman to recoil in disgust. She swiftly composed herself, tossed a grenade into the passageway below, and disappeared silently through another hidden exit. The blast knocked Big Black unconscious. The female soldier, now safely away from danger, paused to catch her breath, but her hands trembled violently. Unable to suppress her revulsion, she vomited uncontrollably. Despite years of fighting and an unyielding hatred toward the enemy, she still could not easily bear the ruthless brutality of killing. Meanwhile, above ground, the sergeant's worry deepened. Kevin and Big Black had lost radio contact for far too long. His intuition screamed that something terrible had happened. Without hesitation, he left 2 soldiers behind to guard the entrance. He led the others to find another tunnel entry point, determined to rescue his men.
Yet, just a short distance away, the soldiers stumbled upon a horrifying sight. Kevin's lifeless body hung grotesquely from the tunnel opening. The grisly scene paralyzed them with fear. None of them had the courage to retrieve their fallen comrade. Terror overwhelmed them completely. Without another word, they turned and fled in sheer panic. Far beneath them, Big Black slowly regained consciousness. Dazed and confused, he forced himself forward, clawing desperately in the darkness. Every path he took led only to hopeless dead ends. His heart sank with despair as the tunnel walls seemed to close in tighter around him. Trapped deep underground, Big Black found himself completely alone, lost in the merciless labyrinth of death. Above ground, chaos and confusion gripped the surviving American soldiers. Panic spread rapidly through their ranks. Their morale had collapsed. The sergeant, despite witnessing the grisly death of Kevin, stubbornly refused to abandon hope. He believed Big Black might still be alive somewhere deep within the labyrinthine tunnels. Gathering his remaining courage, the sergeant decided to lead 2 soldiers down into the darkness himself. They moved cautiously, each breath tense and shallow. Their flashlights barely penetrated the thick gloom. Soon, they reached a narrow fork in the tunnel. One young soldier nervously suggested splitting up to cover more ground. But the sergeant sharply rejected this idea. He understood that isolation meant certain death in these deadly passages. Instead, he commanded the group to stay close together, continuing slowly into the ominous darkness ahead. However, they had barely taken a few steps forward when disaster struck. The sergeant's foot pressed down on cleverly concealed ground. Instantly, a hidden pit trap sprang open beneath him. Gravity yanked him downward with merciless force. His horrified scream lasted only an instant. His body crashed violently into the bottom of the pit, impaled by numerous sharpened bamboo spikes. Blood poured rapidly from his mangled body. His eyes stared upward, glassy and lifeless. Death had come swiftly and brutally. The remaining 2 soldiers cried out in terror. Their panicked voices echoed off the tunnel walls. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the shadows ahead. Bullets ripped mercilessly through one of the soldiers. The last surviving soldier, a young man named David,
turned and ran. Fear consumed him entirely. Behind him, the unseen attacker, a North Vietnamese guerrilla, lowered his smoking gun. His mission accomplished, the fighter quietly retreated back into darkness, leaving no trace behind. Outside, the 2 American soldiers who had remained guarding the entrance found themselves under sudden attack as well. Gunshots pierced the silent jungle, and one soldier fell immediately. The other soldier, a man named Mike, desperately raised his machine gun. He fired wildly, managing by sheer luck to kill one enemy attacker. But before he could reload, a sharp pain tore through his arm as a bullet struck him. Realizing the enemy guerrillas were closing in quickly, Mike had no choice but to retreat into the tunnels below. The narrow passageways swallowed him instantly. His breathing ragged, he crawled forward blindly, desperate to escape. Deeper underground, David ran frantically, searching for any possible exit. His fingers clawed wildly at walls of dirt. In his desperation, he found a patch of earth softer than the rest. With renewed hope, he furiously dug into it, hoping it might lead him outside. But instead of freedom, David uncovered a gruesome sight. The rotting corpse of a previously killed American soldier fell heavily toward him. Its decomposing flesh oozed a foul stench so overpowering he gagged violently. Horror overwhelmed David completely. He turned and fled blindly through the maze-like tunnels. This discovery was no coincidence. North Vietnamese soldiers had intentionally placed American corpses inside tunnel walls. Their aim was clear: to spread terror and psychological torment among enemy troops. The tactic had succeeded perfectly, driving David into near madness. As panic threatened to consume him completely, David stumbled upon Mike, now severely wounded and bleeding heavily. Shortly afterward, another surviving comrade named Matthew appeared from a connecting tunnel. Relief flooded over all 3 men, however briefly. Together, they vowed to find a way out of this hellish underground nightmare. Yet their newfound hope was short-lived. The female guerrilla who had already killed Kevin had picked up their trail again. She quietly extinguished the candle lighting her section of the tunnel. now cloaked in complete darkness. She moved silently behind them, dagger in hand, her heart racing with adrenaline. A sudden, terrible scream shattered the silence. Mike, who had fallen behind, became the guerrilla's next victim. She attacked swiftly, plunging her dagger into his flesh again and again. Blood sprayed from his open wounds, coating the tunnel walls. Mike's agonized cries filled the passageway, but David and Matthew, trapped in front of him, could neither turn nor escape. Helplessly, they stood motionless, hearing their friend's last desperate gasps. Finally, the female fighters stepped back into darkness, vanishing like a phantom. Mike lay motionless, his blood pooling around him in a grim halo. Watching this horror unfold, David lost the will to live. Overcome by despair, he sat down quietly in the dark tunnel. He lit a cigarette with trembling hands, resigned to wait silently for death. To him, survival now seemed meaningless. In stark contrast, Matthew's will remained unbroken. He refused to accept such a fate. Determined, he crawled onward alone, continuing the desperate search for an escape route. It wasn't long before two North Vietnamese guerrillas discovered David sitting motionless in the dark. They cautiously approached from opposite directions, hoping to ambush him silently. But despite his hopelessness, David remained alert. The slightest sound triggered his instinct. As one guerrilla rushed forward, David quickly raised his weapon and fired. The attacker fell instantly, lifeless. The second guerrilla swiftly struck from behind, slashing open David's arm, slicing through an artery. David screamed in pain but summoned the last ounce of his strength to wrestle away the enemy's knife, driving it fiercely into the guerrilla's chest. Blood poured out heavily from both men. David, badly wounded but alive, suddenly felt something strange, a glimmer of hope. The Vietnamese guerrillas were brutal, but not immortal. For the first time, David understood clearly. They could bleed, suffer, and die just like anyone else. But survival was far from guaranteed. The narrow tunnel around him was now blocked by dead bodies, trapping him. Gritting his teeth against the pain, David reluctantly grabbed the knife again. He had no choice. Slowly, agonizingly, he began cutting through the corpses to clear a pathway forward. Above ground, the North Vietnamese guerrillas had completed their meticulous preparation. Deep beneath the American camp, a carefully constructed tunnel network stretched toward the heart of their enemy's base. Without any warning, gunfire erupted from every direction. Vietnamese soldiers emerged from hidden tunnel entrances and dense jungle foliage, attacking with ferocious speed. The Americans were caught completely off guard. Gunfire ripped through tents and shelters, striking down soldiers before they had a chance to grab their weapons. Explosions shook the earth violently. Flames rose rapidly, engulfing equipment and supply tents. Chaos reigned supreme as screams of pain and panic filled the air. In mere moments, the American base had become a fiery battlefield. Soldiers ran desperately in every direction. Their defensive formations crumbled instantly. They fired wildly, often hitting nothing but air. Ammunition depots exploded, sending plumes of smoke high into the sky. Amid this horrifying chaos, one guerrilla fighter approached the body of a dying American soldier. Without hesitation or mercy, he pulled out his bayonet and began stabbing the man repeatedly. Even after the soldier lay motionless and dead, the guerrilla continued stabbing with uncontrolled rage. His comrades, alarmed by this furious outburst, had to physically restrain him to stop the violence. Meanwhile, the American commander lay gravely wounded amid the devastation. Blood streamed from his injuries as he struggled to remain conscious. Understanding clearly that his base could not survive, he made a bitter, final decision. He picked up the radio transmitter and called headquarters, requesting immediate activation of Operation Broken Sword, a ruthless bombing strategy designed to wipe out everything within 1 kilometer radius. After issuing this final order, the commander dragged himself painfully toward the ammunition storage tent. He knew exactly what had to be done. In a final act of defiance, he detonated the depot himself. A tremendous explosion tore through the entire area, annihilating every trace of life within reach. The sky turned a violent shade of crimson. Smoke billowed upward, thick and choking. But the Vietnamese fighters did not halt their assault. Determined to leave no survivors, they unleashed flamethrowers upon the ruined camp. Flames spread uncontrollably, incinerating the remains of tents, vehicles, and bodies. It was a cold, merciless act. Final revenge upon their hated enemy. Deep inside the tunnel, David continued desperately cutting his way through the tangled mess of corpses. Blood and dirt covered him, mixing into a grotesque paste on his trembling skin. His breathing became heavy, almost suffocating him. But finally, after endless suffering, he found a wooden barrier covering an exit. Hope surged again within him. He pried at it carefully, desperate to escape the hell beneath the earth. But unknown to him, another guerrilla fighter had silently followed behind and quickly sealed off the exit from outside. As soon as the barrier moved, David heard a terrifying roar. The tunnels began flooding rapidly. A violent rush of muddy water surged in from every direction, swallowing everything in its path. Alone and helpless, David finally drowned in that endless grave. At that exact moment, in another tunnel branch, Big Black regained consciousness once again. Pain surged through his body, but an unyielding determination to survive drove him onward. Crawling slowly through the pitch-black tunnel, he eventually discovered an underground pool. Without hesitation, he plunged into the freezing water, desperately hoping it might lead him out. Big Black struggled fiercely against the current, lungs burning for air. Just as his strength began to fade, he noticed a faint glimmer of light ahead. He summoned one final surge of energy and surfaced, gasping violently for breath. To his astonishment, he had entered a small chamber occupied by a Vietnamese guerrilla. Instantly realized that only one would leave the room alive. The guerrilla lunged for his weapon. Big Black, reacting instinctively, pulled out a grenade. He yanked the pin free, tossing it directly toward his enemy. A thunderous explosion erupted inside the confined space. The guerrilla's body was ripped apart, blood splattering across the walls. Big Black, though wounded and disoriented, staggered slowly toward an exit. But suddenly, the gorilla, who was still clinging desperately to life, crawled forward to block his path. Big Black froze, uncertain what the dying enemy would do next. Instead of attacking, the gorilla slowly raised his hand and pointed toward a hidden exit in another direction. Big Black stared at him, uncertain, yet strangely understanding. He nodded slightly, accepting this unexpected mercy from a dying enemy. Trusting the gorilla's final gesture, he crawled silently into the indicated passageway. In yet another distant tunnel branch, Matthew, the final surviving American soldier, stumbled into a small chamber. To his shock, he found the Vietnamese female gorilla he had encountered before, now sheltering two frightened young children. Her eyes blazed with fierce maternal determination. Matthew hesitated, raising his gun slightly, but something inside him restrained his trigger finger. Instead of attacking, he tried desperately to communicate his intentions. He pleaded with her, explaining in broken phrases that he merely wanted to find an exit and meant no harm, but the woman understood none of his words. The language barrier transformed them instantly from potential allies into mortal enemies. Realizing words were useless, Matthew slowly lowered his weapon. His gesture communicated clearly his peaceful intentions, speaking louder than any language could. The gorilla woman hesitated, her grip loosening slightly on the dagger. At that moment, Big Black emerged finally from the tunnels. His battered body trembled uncontrollably. Relief flooded through him, believing his nightmare had ended at last. But the distant roar of approaching aircraft shattered his newfound hope. Operation Broken Sword had begun. American planes soared overhead, releasing waves of napalm bombs. The jungle burst into flames. The earth shook violently, consuming everything in a hellish firestorm. Explosions collapsed the chamber where Matthew and the Vietnamese guerrilla woman stood. The children screamed as massive stones and dirt crushed them beneath tons of debris. Both adults frantically tried to dig the children free. Their hands became bloodied and raw, but their desperate efforts proved futile. The chamber sealed itself completely, trapping them. Oxygen slowly faded from the small remaining space. In their final moments, both enemies sat silently beside each other, surrendering to an unavoidable fate. There was no more hatred, no more violence, only profound, shared grief remained. Their eyes closed gently, embracing the darkness together. silence returned once again to the cold tunnels, forever claiming their final breath. The earth above the tunnels had turned into an inferno. Flames roared violently from the endless barrage of napalm bombs. Smoke choked the sky completely. Everything that once stood, trees, tents, human bodies, now burned relentlessly. In just minutes, an entire battlefield had transformed into scorched earth. Deep beneath this nightmare, silence finally enveloped the ruined chambers and passages. Matthew and the Vietnamese woman remained trapped together beneath tons of rubble. Their efforts to save the two innocent children had been tragically futile. Oxygen slowly dwindled. The flickering lamp finally sputtered out, plunging them into absolute darkness. Mothers had lost sons, wives had lost husbands, and children would never again see their fathers return home. As night fell, the battlefield became quiet and still. The fierce gunfire, terrifying explosions, and haunting screams faded away completely. All that remained were the ruins, ashes, and countless corpses scattered across the silent landscape. A thin mist drifted slowly among the shattered trees, gently covering the battlefield like a mournful shroud. The tunnels below lay utterly silent now, their secrets buried forever beneath tons of earth. They would remain hidden, carrying the tragic stories of lives lost within their dark confines. No one would ever truly know all the pain, bravery, and suffering experienced by those who fought beneath the ground. Tunnel Rats was more than a simple war movie. It was an anguished cry, a powerful indictment of war's inhumanity. It offered no heroes, no glory, no redemption. Instead, it brutally revealed war's true face, ruthless, meaningless, and endlessly destructive. Every character was a victim, each death meaningless and painful. There were no true winners, only grieving survivors left to bear scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. The tunnels were a dark metaphor for the endless brutality and hopelessness of war
itself, a place where humanity disappeared completely, replaced only by horror, blood, and despair.